Thank
You're
you.
at that link. All right. Hey, Brad. Thank you for joining us. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight. This is Brad Chatterley, and I met Brad years ago when he was doing more sourcing. How many years have you been with Young Living?
7 years.
7 years. So I'd love for you to explain a little bit of what you were doing
Okay.
in sourcing and then to introduce yourself even stronger. And then now he is part of our portfolio team that is in charge of essential oils. So you can tell us a little bit more about that to give us a little bit of a bio. Brad, was it like 2018 you came to Chicagoland to speak for us, I think,
Yep.
and we were like blown away by the information that we had never been told. So, what tonight is all about, my friends out there, is the back behind the scenes of what goes on to acquire our essential oils and keep the quality intact. So,
Yeah.
take it away, Brad. You can introduce yourself a little bit more and
Okay.
tell us about you.
Yeah. I mean, and the stuff that I'm going to talk about tonight is really the stuff that um, we worry about, so that you don't have to. But you'll get a peek kind of behind the curtain and see what some of that is. And when I started in 2015, yeah, I started as a um, oil sourcing specialist. And sourcing is really, at its broadest sense, just choosing suppliers. What suppliers are we going to work with? Why are we picking those suppliers? It's about finding suppliers who are aligned with our values. And I say suppliers because that's I came up in my career in sourcing, and so we always talk about suppliers and vendors. So really, that's whoever we're purchasing from, anyone we're purchasing from. And we when I started, Gary was still with us, and pretty much all of the suppliers we were using, all the vendors, the growers, the distillers, were ones that he had a hand in selecting. And so we still work with many of those today. And it wasn't so much at that point in time selecting new people to work with as it was just establishing and maintaining a relationship with them, communicating with them, understanding when products were going to be produced and distilled, when the harvest season was, letting them know how much we were going to need. There's a lot of communication back and forth that needs to be done when you're dealing with agricultural products. And so that's what I did for about 6 years. And towards the end, I was the director of the sourcing team for essential oils. And we grew a lot in those years. And so we did have to work on finding additional essential oil supply, and it had to be essential oil supply that met our quality expectations and met the same quality expectations that we'd had with all of our distillers and growers that Gary had been working with. And so we had to go through that process of really getting out there, getting on the ground, finding people who were doing things the way that we wanted them to be, or that were willing to do things the way that we wanted them to be. And so that was a part of it as well. And we coordinated a lot with our own farm teams, our own agronomists, and hi, Tammy, our own agronomists and distillers, and would take them with us and take our R&D team with us as well. So it was really a collaborative effort, and our legal team and compliance teams as well. And I'll talk about why they would come with us on some of these trips in my presentation. So um, in January of just this year, I switched roles. I spent about 12 years of my career in supply chain, sourcing, procurement, 6 of that here at Young Living. And I've joined the product portfolio team, which is more of a marketing and product development focus. And so, whereas I was dealing with what you could call the back end from the supply into Young Living, it's now really dealing with that front end, and it's our products out to you in the field and out to our customers and potential new customers. And it's really about working to understand your needs And this has been something that's a new part for me. And so I don't know if we'll have time, Pam, but if people have feedback to give, questions for part of my new role, I am eager to hear
Yes.
what you guys think, what you want, what you're looking for, what will be helpful. And then part of it too is just organization, looking at our product portfolio and saying, we have a lot of oils. So how do we organize these? How do we help customers understand how to use these products? How do we get the message out there? And when we do launch new products, why are we launching those products? And how are they? And making sure too that it's something new that's in line with Young Living's values and with our customer needs. So that's where I've been and what I'm doing now.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yes, I think we would love for you to hear our voices as much as we're excited to hear yours. And I just want to really point out how fantastic it is that you went from where you were in sourcing and the expertise that our oils probably better than most in Young Living. I would say you're in the top 5 of knowledge with what our oils are about, where they come from, all those things. And now you're helping us do our job better. So I know that Brett has tons of ideas to share with us and tons of information. So let's just get to it. And hopefully, we'll have some time for you to hear us as well.
Yeah, great. Okay. I think I can share my screen. So let me get, um, get that shared. Okay, can you guys see this? Okay, so I've provided some of this information before, but I've also added some new things and hopefully can go into some other detail that if you have seen some of this, some other detail, it'll be new to you. So I really want to talk about our supply chain. And I want to start by talking about our essential oil history. And essential oil has been used by many cultures for thousands of years as medicines and perfumes and in rituals and in daily life. And it's cultures across the world have been doing this. And I think that's one of the things that's really, really empowering about using oils today is that connection to history. And oftentimes that's even been within the last few generations. Some of a lot of that knowledge was held by women in families, and so it was mothers and grandmothers and great grandmothers who held the knowledge of these plants that were used for these purposes. And so being able to tap back into that again after we've been so, I would say, disconnected from it by the way we've done modern Western medicine, I think is really empowering. Essential oils have also long been a part of international trade. I read a really interesting book a couple years ago called The Silk Roads, and it goes through the history of international trade along the old Silk Road route. And they talk about essential oils being transported from the Far East to Europe thousands of years ago. So these were part of the international trade, and they were making their way around the world as a valuable commodity. So today, they're still produced in large volumes. So that's mainly been for fragrance and flavor purposes. That's how it was when Gary started really digging into essential oils. And even though the way that we use oils now through Young Living has grown into much larger volumes, as you'll see in a little bit, the largest production for overall is still for fragrance and flavor purposes. And the industry today is a huge network of essential oil producers and other interests. So other companies that will come in and take the essential oils and break them down into derivatives or utilize components of them to synthesize other components. And it starts to get really complex and takes you further and further away, I think, from their natural state and from nature. And within that flavor and fragrance industry, essential oils are sometimes used in their pure form, but more often, I would say, they're broken down into individual components. So like a huge one of these is menthol from mint. So India is the world's largest producer of mint oils. That's one called corn mint, Mentha arvensis, which we don't use, as well as the Mentha peperita. And one of the challenges with this is that they will strip the menthol out of Mentha arvensis, and then they have everything else left over minus the menthol. And they actually have a name for it. It's called DMO, dementholized oil. And they have to find something to do with that. And what do they do with it? Well, they blend it in with real oil, thereby extending it and adulterating it. And so these are some of the challenges that are still very prevalent in the broader essential oil production industry. So even though there is a bigger industry involved in the essential oil trade than just what we do, which I'll call essential oils for wellness and for empowerment, getting high quality oils is still very demanding, even in small amounts. The flavor and fragrance industry is massive. They say, this is from their own publications, they use around 105,000 metric tons. A metric ton is 1,000 kilos. So 105,000 metric tons of essential oils annually. I think that our industry, I would say, this is just Brad's estimate, we use around 2,000 metric tons. And that's not just Young Living, that would be competitors who are trying to do the same thing that we are. But the amount of quality essential oils is very small. And so what we're actually doing is it's a challenge to fight for those high quality ingredients. And that's the same challenge that Gary ran into when he started the company. And it really is still very much a part of what we do today. And I'll talk about one example of how that plays out in the industry. How is it difficult to get the really high quality oils? Well, bergamot has been used in fine fragrance for a long time. It's a staple in some very famous fragrances. The production estimates in Italy are around 150 metric tons of pure bergamot essential oil. And depending on the year and the weather, it could be half that. There's years they've produced only 80 metric tons. But they seem to annually export around 800 metric tons of bergamot oil. So if they're only producing 80 to 150 metric tons, where is the other 650 tons coming from? Well, it's coming from adulteration. It's coming from, sometimes that is just taking something like tangerine oil or orange essential oil and blending it in to extend the bergamot, or adding other adulterants to it. So this is very much a challenge still in the industry today. I would say that our success is our blessing, but it also is our challenge, because as I think we've seen the rise in awareness of essential oils and the value and the power they can have in our lives, more and more companies and bigger companies have started to use them in their own products. So you have these Airwick essential mists that are made with essential oils. You have these Blue Tansy facial oils here. You have the Dr. Teal's body lotion with melatonin and essential oils. And so all of these people are trying to find essential oils as well. And they're not going to know the type of things that we know about essential oils. And so the quality of what's in there is not going to be top quality products for these, but it also adds more demand into the overall market for us. And it also means that we have to do even a better job, I think, as a company, of differentiating like why Young Living essential oils. If you can go get them in all of these types of products, why would you get them from Young Living? And we have very good reason to, and I think hopefully that will become, I mean, I know I'm talking to people who already know this, I think, for the most part, but it'll help share the story with others. So where real essential oils come from? They are either farmed or wild collected. And for most of our essential oils, there are thousands of individuals and families on a very small scale involved. because most of our essential oils actually come from developing countries, and they come from rural areas in these developing countries. And so, with very few exceptions, we're not talking about very large commercial scale farms. Like you think of if you've been to maybe some of the lavender fields in France, some of the citrus plantations are very large. US mint farms are pretty large. But other than that, most of it's done by what's called smallholder farmers who have on average 2 hectares or less of land. And on top of that, around 25% of the oils that we offer are wild collected. And so this is a picture here of when I was in Morocco in 2018, and we went to see the myrtle harvest and collection of myrtle from the wild. And so these women had just been out in the foothills collecting myrtle. And it often takes place in regions like this. You can see in the background, it's very arid, it's very hot there, it's very rural. There's not a lot of development in these areas. And so oftentimes with wild collecting, or what we call wildcrafting, this is actually a pretty important part of these individuals and families' income, is to be able to go out and collect these plant species. Another example here is jasmine from India. So IFIAT is a trade organization around essential oils, and they estimate that around 16,000 acres in India are under cultivation for the production of jasmine. And that's around 20,000 farmers. So that means they have 0.5 to 1 acre on average. I was there at the end of 2017, and we visited several farmers, and most of these fields of jasmine were just around their homes. And so they would have half an acre around their home of jasmine plants, where when it was harvest time, that's what they would go out and do before they go to work in the morning, is collect the flowers, take them to a collection facility, and be paid for the flowers that they harvested that day. And in this picture too, you can see lots of other grasses and things growing up around these. Some of you have maybe been to our farms and our fields. This is actually, even though it's not the neatest or prettiest looking field, this is actually a good indication, because what it means is they're not spraying pesticides and herbicides here on these plants to kill the weeds in between. So usually it's the whole family that works on these farms. So if you have 20,000 farmers, but they have 4 or 5 people in their family, you get around 80,000 to 100,000 people involved in the picking activity every year for jasmine. And our partner in India works with over 800 jasmine farmers in the growing region. And when we go out there and visit, we always pick a handful of those farmers to go and audit, to go and see their harvesting and their collection, as well as seeing the extraction of the jasmine. But you start to get a scope for the size of the supply chain and the breadth of it and how many people are involved in it. And so sometimes people want to know, well, how do we, if there's 800 farmers that just our partner in India works with, how do we connect with the people that are making the real oil? Well, that sort of setup is pretty common in most of the countries where essential oils are being grown and produced. You have a lot of small growers or collectors, if they're wild collectors. These people usually have limited experience to market and export products internationally. Some of them have the ability to extract essential oils, while others don't. So then what you have is usually this other layer of this is just Brad's terminology based on my experience, an in-country broker. These are just people who basically work with all of the growers and collectors and provide a necessary, important step in the process, because these growers and collectors often don't have that ability to take the product to a broader market. And so they will work with them, they will aggregate it, they will take the needs of the customer, like Young Living, and allow us to go and visit their growers and make sure that they are doing it the way that we want them to. As well, a lot of these growers and collectors don't speak English. And so we work in 40 countries around the world. And so it's very helpful to have someone like our partner in India that is completely transparent with us, that takes us to the growers, and that also speaks our language as well as the language of the growers. Sometimes these brokers are competing for oil from the growers. So we'll talk a little bit later too about how in these very small markets, the basic dynamics of supply and demand play out very regularly. That's really what we're dealing with when we're working in these markets. It's some really basic economic factors that you'd learn in like Econ 101. On top of that, there's what I call international brokers. So these people often are working with the in-country brokers. They regularly buy and sell product to each other. I've talked to people who have oil that passed through 3 other brokers' hands before it got to them, and they had no idea what grower it came from. And I think this is more common than not in the industry. And these are the people who often feed into that flavor and fragrance industry. And in what I've seen in my time, this is where most essential oil companies get their oils from. So they're working with these people who are buying and selling from each other, who often don't have traceability back to the grower and collector to know where the oils are coming from. And then on top of that, you have these large flavor and fragrance companies, you have contract manufacturers, and these are the ones that are usually also buying from these international brokers. So our sources of oil at Young Living, this is a very interesting book that I found really helpful that Gary wrote in 1996. So he wrote back in 1996, in addition to the oil we produce, Young Living purchases tens of thousands of dollars in oil volume per month. By 1997, with our current growth rate, we will be purchasing over $1 million in oil volume yearly. I can tell you it's much, much higher than that. But I think from our beginning, we've always tried to be transparent as a company that we purchase from essential oil suppliers, our own farm production, and partner farms. But I think the thing to remember there is that it all comes from plants grown in the earth. And because we at Young Living understand how these essential oil markets work, and we understand how to get back to the grower level for these products, that's where we're working. And that's, I think, a big difference between us and most of the other companies that are out there. So I want to talk about some of the effort we go to actually get these products. So in that book too, Gary it was even before he utilized the phrase seed to seal, but he did talk about the efforts that he went to ensure that he was getting quality essential oils. And really, when I look at this, it boils down to 3 things that we still spend the vast majority of our time on at Young Living. One is transparent supply chains. So I hope that you could see in some of these prior slides how challenging it can be if you don't know what you're doing to actually have a transparent supply chain in this industry. And we work really hard to do that. We have traveled all over the world to get back to the producers and growers. And that's what Gary did from the beginning. So it's the tone that he set for us as a company. We also have agriculture and distillation expertise. When Gary couldn't get some oils, he would start a farm. That's why we have the Northern Lights Black Spruce distillery, because he had been purchasing that from a trusted supplier in Canada, and they could not get enough. So he said, well, I'm going to go build my own distillery then, and we're going to produce our own oil. The other reason that he did that was because he could envision a day when there would not be enough quality oil for us. And so he felt like the only way you could ensure that you had that oil in some instances was to make sure that you had some of your own production of that. And that's still a relevant point today. And our agriculture and distillation teams also oversee the procurement of any oil that we are purchasing from other distillers and other growers. And so we are able to use our in-house agriculture and distillation expertise to work with the people who we are getting that from externally. And I just don't know of really anybody else that can say that. And then the other thing that Gary knew was, like with the bergamot example, he knew there was a lot of adulteration on the market. He also knew that there was just a lot of poor quality oils due to poor production practices. And so he did a lot of testing and research. We have some of the most advanced testing for adulteration that I know of. We worked closely with our R&D team we've even identified new test methods for adulteration for certain oils. And we are always, when we're on the sourcing side, we're talking with people about, well, what kind of adulteration is happening with this oil now? Because I liken it to kind of like doping in the sports world. Whatever test they know that you're using, they figure out a way to beat that test. And so you're always having to develop new test methods to test for the next thing that they're doing to adulterate. And that's actually why we've even gone from things like, if you've heard presentations on our testing efforts, there's things called organoleptic testing, which is things like optical rotation, specific gravity, and refractive index. Those were kind of the original tests for essential oil quality. They're somewhat rudimentary. And so people figured out ways to adulterate the oil and still pass those 3 tests. So then the next phase was sort of the GC testing, the gas chromatograms, where you're starting to look at individual components within the oil and understanding what values, what levels those should be at. And now there are ways that people can, they know how to adulterate those oils and pass a GC. And so you either have to know what to look for. There's very, very trace components sometimes that are indications of adulteration, or you also develop different types of test methods. And that's where things like our IRMS testing comes in, which is isotope ratio gas chromatography. And we have chiral testing, which looks for a natural right or left hand design that shows up in natural products and that doesn't show up in synthetic products, but you only see it if you're looking for that specifically. And so we've worked to really continue to stay on top of these methods that people are using to adulterate. And then the other piece of the testing and research is also just on the production side. We have right now in our R&D warehouse, we're growing some frankincense trees. We acquired seeds, and we are looking at the best ways to propagate frankincense seeds because there's all kinds of challenges to that supply chain. And so we'd like to be prepared for the day when maybe we can have some of our own plantings of those, because right now it's all wildcrafted. And so there's all kinds of research that goes on to figure out the right ways to grow, to harvest, to distill products. And that testing and research has not stopped at Young Living and is still ongoing. Are we good? Pam, do I want to see, I mean, should we ask if there's any questions right now, or should we just go through the whole thing? Because I feel like I'm talking a lot and going fast.
You are talking a lot, and it seems like you're not talking to anyone, but you're talking to 83 of us. And keep going, because people can write their questions in the chat and we will answer at the end. But I think everybody really wants to hear what you have to say.
Okay, good. We'll keep going then. I wanted to give a little bit more of an in-depth example of the importance of having transparent supply chains and the work that is. And that's not a phrase that Gary used. That's more of a kind of an industry phrase when we're talking about supply chain. But I think it works really well for what we're trying to do and what we do here at Young Living and what Gary did for, what we've done for the last almost 30 years. And a good example of this is cedarwood. This is the species Cedrus atlantica. If you go and search for cedarwood essential oil online, you're going to see a lot of different species come up. And actually, several of them are from species in the US that come out of Texas. There's, and they're actually juniper species. So there's, I think, Juniperus mexicana, there's several of them. A lot of them aren't the true cedar wood from the Alice Mountains in Morocco. But that's the one that Gary felt like was the, and we believe is the best, highest quality cedar wood oil out there. And it's long been used in perfumes and colognes historically. But there's a lot going on here. Before I jump to that, let me just say, this is a wild crafted species, and it comes from the mountains in Morocco, and its population has significantly shrank over the last 100 years, though that is not the case so much recently. So within the last, I would say, 30 years, the population of cedarwood has become very stable. And the reason it's become very stable, and the reason we feel comfortable as a company sourcing this product, is because the Moroccan government actually heavily regulates this industry. It would be very hard to illegally cut down cedarwood trees. And what the government does is their Ministry of the Forest goes out and parcels the land. They send people out who count every single cedarwood tree in a portion of land, and they measure their height, they measure their diameter, they estimate their age, and they identify only a certain number of them that can be cut down within that parcel. And they mark them. And when the harvesters get their parcels of land that they've been given or that they've won in their process of applying for it, the stump gets marked, and the tree above where it's cut gets marked, and the wood itself and the cut piece gets stamped with an identification and approval from the forestry department that these are legitimate trees to be cut down. So even when they are taken to the lumber mills, it will have that tree number on it that can be traced back to the particular lot that it came from, and they can find the stump that it came from that's in the ground. So it is very highly regulated. And in fact, once the harvest season is over, then the government goes back in and they check the area to make sure nothing has been cut that wasn't supposed to be cut. And they also actually make them clean up everything that they left behind. The gentleman, the one of the collectors that we talked to, said that if they leave a piece of wood behind that's bigger than a pencil, they get fined for that. And so they really are trying to take care of these forests and these natural resources. On top of that, our distiller that we work with has multiple projects where they are reforesting cedarwood trees. And so they have new plantations that they've started where they're taking those seedlings and they're putting them back out into the mountains and trying to actually extend the coverage of cedarwood trees. So cedarwood essential oil is actually a byproduct of the lumber industry. And so the distillers are usually getting either the leftover cut pieces of wood after it's been through the lumber yard, or they're getting the sawdust. Sometimes they're able to go and get the roots, which are actually, the root ball is really high in essential oil content. And so they can get the root ball and then chip that up and distill it, but all gets distilled as basically sawdust. And the lumber mills are buying the trees from the people who have the permits to collect. And so way back when Gary was figuring this out and he was asking people, when we started learning about these permits, we would talk to the distillers and say, well, do you have a permit to know that we want to ensure that this oil is coming from trees that were legally harvested? Well, the distiller doesn't have that permit. They just know that they get the sawdust from the lumber mill. And the lumber mill doesn't have that permit. They just know that they buy it from the people who do have the permits. And so we had to go back 3 steps in the supply chain and explain to everyone along the way why we're asking for this, because they've never had anyone ask for this type of information before. No one goes back to this level of detail. But what we do is we actually get copies of the permits. And so I have just a small example of that in the top left-hand corner. That's actually not the permit itself. That is just their the harvester's formal notification that they are going to request a parcel of land to harvest from. And so they have a certain date they have to make their request by. But we get copies of these documents, and we have a lawyer that we work with in Morocco that reviews these documents to ensure that they are the proper documents, and that the oil that we are purchasing is coming from trees that were harvested legally and according to the government's regulations. But it requires going back a lot of steps to get there. That's a little bit, that's one aspect of stewardship, is really stewardship of these products as natural resources. There's another aspect of stewardship that we feel at Young Living that doesn't get thought about a lot or gets overlooked a little bit. And so I put up here this chart, which is kind of very boring looking, but what we have done here is we overlaid the market price for Sri Lankan cinnamon bark essential oil from 1991 to 2019. And that is our red line that you see here. And you can see that it follows a pretty gradual upward trajectory for quite a while, for about half the chart. And then it skyrockets, and the price more than doubles in a short period of time. And then what you see is that it actually crashes back down. And we overlaid that chart over what's known as the archetypal boom and bust cycle. And so when we're working in these markets, and think about the growth phase that we had as a company, and we needed more and more oil, and we're sometimes needing to double the amount of oil in a year that we were acquiring and using. And what we can do in that situation is, if we go and push and push and push for more oil, well, demand is higher than supply for a period of time. And so whenever that happens, prices go up. And so when the price goes up, that incentivizes more people to come in and produce more, which is good up to a point, because they say, oh, we can make this much money producing this essential oil. Let's put more into the ground. Let's grow more of this. And what almost invariably happens is it hits a point where there is then overproduction. There's more supply on the market than there is demand, and the price craters. And as you look back over 30 or 50 years of this, where there is public data, there's not a lot of public data on essential oil market costs, but you can see this cycle play out over and over and over again. And it's really challenging for the people on the ground. And so, well, this is a pretty dry chart kind of about economic forces. What we think about is the people that are impacted by this. So when we're working with our partners, our growers, our distillers, we know that if we push sometimes too hard, we can drive up prices, and we can create the situation of oversupply. And then when it crashes, people are having to liquidate whatever stocks they have. They're offering it lower than it costs to produce it. And people have gone out of business. People have lost their homes, gone bankrupt because of this. And so we try to keep, even during these growth phases, we try to keep demand with our suppliers as steady as we can, because we don't want to create this problem for them in their lives. And it's kind of a delicate balance to figure out um, how we meet increased demand on our side without doing this. But it takes some really talented individuals, and I'm not one of them. I had a fantastic team. I had someone on my team who was, I would say, a genius at this aspect at Young Living, and really talented individuals to work closely with our suppliers and our growers and distillers and be in constant communication with them about what's needed and when, and making those joint decisions together about when to grow more, when to put more in the ground, when to procure more, so that we are trying to be responsible stewards of the whole market for that product and of the families and individuals involved in that production. So I did this a little bit before, and I've heard some concerns come up periodically in my time at Young Living, and one of those is sometimes about why we buy from a specific country, or someone will say, well, why do we buy from that country, or why do we buy from this country? And it's pretty simple. One of the things that I actually heard Mary say recently is that plants don't discriminate. Plants grow in the best places for them to grow. And so if we're buying something from Egypt, we buy it because that's where the best coriander, the best geranium is being grown, is in Egypt. If there's products we get from China, such as wintergreen, that is where wintergreen grows, and that is where it comes from. And so that's why we purchase from the places that we purchase from. Another thing is, sometimes we do have quality issues, and we catch those on the front end, though. I often think if we never had oil with quality issues, our quality team would be very bored and we wouldn't need them. They'd just be sitting around passing every oil that comes through, but they don't. So even with all of the sourcing efforts that we go to, even with working closely with our producers, we still run into issues, but we don't compromise on that quality. We fail oils pretty regularly here at Young Living. One of those examples is wintergreen. The market was short supplied. They had an awful year of weather. They had an awful year of drought. It's a wild-crafted product. There was not enough on the market, and we started being offered oil that had clearly been adulterated. And the only reason we knew it was adulterated is because we knew how people were adulterating wintergreen, and we did additional testing to check for that. It would have passed a GC test alone, but we knew how to do the other tests to identify adulteration, and we were not willing to sell that product. And so we went out of stock on quite a few things, and a lot of people were very unhappy with us. And yet it's an example of why and how we don't compromise on that quality, and why we have a quality team. I heard at one point in time that we ship essential oils from suppliers to Young Living farms and then try to claim it comes from the farm. I can just tell you, I don't know, that's a weird one. Never heard of that happening in my time here. I oversaw that aspect of our business for a while. We never did that. So we also test for not just adulteration, but contamination. So adulteration is usually things that are added in intentionally to extend the oil. Contamination are things that are often added unintentionally found in the oils. And that is often things like heavy metals or phthalates, and we do test for those things. And then people will sometimes say, well, seed to seal is just marketing. And I can tell you, it's not just marketing, because I and my team have done that work. And we've actually created the standard. And I just want to say a couple of things about that. When there are very few existing standards for essential oils. And so when there are very few existing standards, you do have to create your own. There are no other options. One of those is the International Organization for Standardization, which is short for ISO. And they say on their website that ISO standards are internationally agreed by experts. There aren't ISO standards for most essential oils, but there are for some. And the experts that they used to develop those standards were experts from the flavor and fragrance industry. And what the flavor and fragrance industry values is consistency. They want to see a consistent product. They want to see a peppermint that has the same level of menthol and menthofurans every time. And the only way you get that is by modifying the product. And so those standards that are actually out there, we look at those when they exist and we compare our oils to those, but they're actually often not good standards for what we're looking for as a company. And so Gary went to a lot of work and spent immense effort to research and learn how to have our own internal standards for what would make a quality essential oil. And our standards are also holistic. So when there's standard, even the standards that exist like ISO, that's about having certain levels of chemical constituents in an oil. But Gary knew that it mattered how it was grown, how it was harvested, how it was distilled, how it was packaged and transported. If you did any of those steps along the way that was poorly, you could degrade the quality of the oil. And so he had to create a standard that was a lot more holistic than anything that's out there. He knew quality had to touch on that whole production process. And so sometimes I'll hear people say, well, you know, do you have third-party testing? And we do use third-party testing when we need to. There are certain tests we can't run ourselves. There are certain things that we go to third-party labs for. But in all honesty, we know more than most of those third-party labs about what makes for a quality essential oil. And so in some ways, sending those oils out for testing to third-party labs is almost, and sometimes it would be like sending it to people who know less about it than we do and asking them to test it for us. And that just has never made sense to me. So we do that when it makes sense, but honestly, we've developed the in-house expertise and know more about these oils than just about anybody else out there in the world. So the why, I think sometimes we focus a bit too much on the what, not enough on the why. Why do we do this? And it really goes back to Gary's experience in the 80s. He tried using essential oil somebody gave him and he wasn't impressed with them. He stopped. He was like, oh, no. I tried it, didn't work. But then he learned a bit more about them. He went to Europe. He brought those first 13 oils back from Europe and he was very impressed with the results. And he realized that it was because he had been using, those first ones he used were low quality oils. And they just don't function in the way that high quality, unadulterated, natural essential oils do. And that's the why. That's why we do all of this. And that's what continues to motivate us to do that every day. And they pulled these numbers for me. We have 750 million bottles of oil sold since 2006. That is a lot of bottles of oil. And every single one of those has met the standard that, that Gary set and that we continue to follow as a company. All of that was pretty much on the old job that I did. I wanted to throw one thing in here. And again, this is new to me, so I don't know if it's useful or helpful or not, but I've just been thinking about new customers and introducing Young Living to new customers. And, you know, I think we have some really good introductory products out there. One is Simplified, the new Simplified. This is so easy because you don't have to know much about oils. It just makes your home smell good. It's non-synthetic product. It's a natural product. It's really easy for people to know how to use it and not be a little bit apprehensive about talking about potential other uses for it. And it comes in a really nice packaging. It's a great introduction for new people. The Seed to Seal Story Collection, we've had this around for a while. I think this is a really great introduction to kind of the why of Young Living, because it talks about our farming background and it talks about how we take our agricultural and distillation expertise and apply it throughout our supply chain. So I think that's a good one that really helps differentiate our product from other products that are out there in other companies. And then I think the Everyday Oils Kit, it's been around for a long time. It has a great introductory brochure for you, a lot of you guys, that's probably really basic information. But I think, I don't know, I just, from what I've seen, it feels like sometimes we overlook some of these tools that we already have. And it's just got great introductory single and blend oils for new people. And especially if you look at these as a journey, somebody could start with simplified just for the aroma of it. You move them into one of these others as an introduction for starting to use oils in the rest of their lives, not just for fragrance. I think we have some really good options out there, and we have some new exciting things coming that I think people are going to be really happy with in the next 12 and 18 months. So that's it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. If you'll take some questions and answers, and feel free to say you cannot answer certain questions if they come, but we hope you can answer all of the questions and whatever questions you have from us that you need information.
Okay.
I will tell you that that middle kit has always been a little challenging to put out because it goes right along with the oils that are really accessible at the grocery stores.
Yeah.
So, what I would like to see more of is more education and more kits with our blends that are different from everyone else's. And I'd like to see essential oil packaging upgraded. Like Golden Touch 1 needs a new name. It needs to be Rescue Now or something like that. Mary, that's actually Mary's idea. And the reason for that is some of our marketing doesn't go along with what it actually is. And I think some of us are having a good time blending ourselves, but I'm even a clinical aromatherapist and I'd rather not blend myself. I'd rather utilize Gary's blends because I know they are special. And I'd love to find someone inside the corporate walls that wants to talk about why are Gary Young's blends different from us blending ourselves. I'd love to have more about that in the future.
That's great feedback. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. That's
Something,
jump in, anybody.
something that came up recently, people are talking about the creamsicle oil, which of course smells like a creamsicle. So they're wondering, we've had these straight essential oils forever. It's peppermint, it's this, it's that, or it's a blend that we've heard of for a long time. So now that we have one that smells like a creamsicle, that seems a little bit too good to be true. People are trying to figure out how can that really be a pure essential oil, and they think, well, that creamsicle one must be adulterated because nothing smells like creamsicle or sea breeze or whatever. So even some kind of education or class, I'm not sure if it's you or someone else who jumps on the Young Living pages or hopefully soon the Young Living Facebook farm page, that you can do these short little quick videos that would be helpful, because people just don't realize there's that many constituents that you can pull out these different flavor or smell profiles.
Right.
And still have a premium essential oil, can't say therapeutic, so premium essential oil that has benefits.
If you all haven't met Brad, that's Stacy Kimbrell. This group is led by Stacy Kimbrell and Danette Goodyear. So I wanted to make sure you guys know each other.
Hello.
Hello, Stacy. I recognize you.
Hi. So that's one thing. Are we ever going to get Rosewood back? Was a question.
No.
Yeah.
Let's see. What do I want to say about that? Well, we would love to, and it is something we are regularly looking at, figuring out how we can do that again in a sustainable way. So it is something on our minds, and it is something that we have some open projects on, but I can't say yes or no to that, but it is definitely something we're very interested in. I may have been to Brazil last year. Just say that.
Awesome. Okay, then we may have some in the future. Okay. Are we having more vitality oils coming back in stock? Or are we getting new vitality oils?
Not at this point in time. And I don't know who asked that question, but what's the thought behind that?
Well, some people do understand that it's the same oil in the bottle, but if you're allowed to only consume internally the white label, which is a vitality of the plus, that would be the issue and the concern.
Okay, so that's something people would be interested in having more of potentially.
Well, if you're only allowed to do certain things with certain things, then yes.
We want to make sure that whatever label, we like knowing that this is how because I've had conversations with Stacy, so I'm going to clarify a little bit, Stacy, if that's okay. Is we like that we know that they're the same oils and not to confuse people, but we also want to know that they are ingestible by the label.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, and I mean, this may be going a little bit too deep on the internal side, just the kind of boring internal side of things, but with claims that we can actually make more claims on ingestible oils than we can on the cosmetic or aromatics. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of interesting how that is set up that way. But we can make stronger claims about those vitality. Mm-hmm. I saw that nutmeg and another one in the 15 mil. I've never heard any talk of making any of the vitality oils 15 mil. I will make note of that. I kind of doubt it will happen, but that's an interesting thought. So I'll make note of that.
Jody Iverson says it would, as a new brand partner, it would be really helpful to have a line on the dropper for mineral essence. I thought there was something wrong with my bottle.
That's a good suggestion.
Yeah.
I know. I mean, if you don't know yet, we just pull it up and do 3 dropperfuls, because 1 dropper you never can get all the way to the top. If that was for Jody, so, or whoever you just said, just to make sure you do know how you use it right now.
I think the majority like 15 milliliter bottles better than 5 mil, especially for those that are priced really low, like a cinnamon bark and a black pepper and some of those that Christy Dempsey is mentioning. When they're low priced, we kind of don't understand why we can't get a 15 mil.
Yeah.
Just
okay.
for
yeah,
feedback.
That makes sense.
And then are you in part helping with the clinical study or getting that information available for us to use?
No, I mean, I know about them and I'm informed with them. So we did a clinical study on longevity. They're looking at doing some clinical studies on some other essential oil blends. But I'm not actually involved in the studies themselves.
Okay, somebody said something about mineral essence in a packet.
I made note of that.
I think that's all the questions I'm seeing. If I've missed a question on here, please repost it. We've got 1 minute and Brad has had a long day.
Do you know the name of the book offhand?
Aromatherapy, the essence.
Oh, you got
Aromatherapy, the beginnings, I think is what
the
it's
essential beginning. Okay.
And I just ordered that. Unfortunately, I forgot the name because it's downstairs, but it actually comes in like a white one now, not the we couldn't find the purple one.
Purple.
Yeah, but
I mean, I don't think it's even in print anymore, so you're probably getting, whatever's circulating out there.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting one. Yeah, and I recognize being in supply chain, it's definitely not the most exciting aspect of business often, but it's the work that really you don't see, and that you don't I guess what I want to say is it's the behind the scenes stuff that we do so that you don't have to. You don't need to know how the cinnamon bark market works and how we try to take care of our suppliers and keep prices steady for them so that their business can be stable and they can support their families. But I do hope, the details of what we do aren't as important, but I hope you came away with an understanding of that we do care about those things, and we as a company know about those things, and we are looking at all of that. And there's just so much that goes into it. So I really appreciate you guys letting me come on and talk about that. And if you have any questions, Pam knows how to get a hold of me. I'm happy to help answer. And it would be great actually to have more discussions with people and get more of your ideas on, what could be beneficial. What do you guys see out in the field? What do you see Young Living that we could be doing, particularly from an essential oil product standpoint, that would be helpful to you? So I really like all of the suggestions that you guys gave this evening and made note of those. So thank you.
I think my biggest takeaway, if I can just say this, is thank you, Brad, for showing us how we are seed to seal. And it's not about all the oils coming from our farms owned by Young Living. That seed to seal also means that we source and have very strong standards as we source abroad. And that Young Living has never tried to say that all the oils come from our own farms. We've never said that. That has been projected and assumed and communicated from field people, and it really isn't the truth. And thank you for bringing us the truth and giving us that trust that Young Living knows what it's doing as we source the best oils around the world and give our stewardship to. We've been global before we ever sold in a global market, because
Yeah,
we were global farming oils and having stewardship with people around the world. So that's pretty
absolutely.
powerful message. So thank you for telling us that. And we will have you back as to speak to groups as much as possible.
Okay, great. Happy to do it.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Hey,